Good morning, everyone. Just doing a quick check to see if you can hear.
Can hear you just fine.
Great. All right. Well, we'll get things started here. My name is Stephen Springhorn, and I'm the Acting Deputy Director of Statewide Groundwater Management with the California Department of Water Resources. And on behalf of both the DWR and the State Water Resources Control Board SGMA teams, we'd like to welcome you and thank you for attending the webinar today. We hope you're all doing well and staying healthy. And I'd also like to thank the team that has coordinated this event and made that possible. So also on behalf of our teams, we do wish we could be meeting with all of you in person, but under the circumstances, we are doing our best, just like all of you have been doing for almost approaching a year now, with keeping things moving forward and sharing information the best way we can during these challenging times. And looking from the number of attendees and RSVPs on the call today, I think the silver lining is that by meeting virtually, we're able to really increase participation across the state and across the SGMA community to share this information and to be answering your questions today. And so we will be recording today's webinar, and we'll be making that available on our DWR webpage in the coming days, so you can refer back to it in the future. So to date, at each major SGMA milestone over the years, we've come together to make sure we have a common understanding of where we're headed next as we collectively implement this important law. And so next slide, please. Just want to cover what we plan to go over today in our game plan, which is three main areas of information. And we'll start with a quick overview of California's groundwater management and where we've been over these last 6 years of SGMA implementation, which have really flown by quickly, and to set the stage of where we're headed next, which is the two areas of topics that we'll focus on today in the webinar. And the first is an update on the latest information on our regulatory role as we head into this year, where we'll be making the first decisions on the groundwater sustainability plans that are currently under review. And we'll be providing information on our approach to releasing those assessments over this coming year. The board staff will also provide an update on their role and related activities. So then we'll pause for a question and answer session, and I'll be providing details on how you can participate in that in the next slide. But the last component of today's webinar is really highlighting the different forms of assistance that we have aligning to our regulatory actions to assist all of you, local agencies, and the SGMA community as we move forward to fill data gaps and improve our understanding and management of groundwater across the state. And we'll also have a question and answer session there at the end of that and to wrap up the webinar. So next slide, please. So before we dive into the details, I'd like to provide you with information you'll need to actively participate in the webinar today. And so as you probably noticed, we're using GoToWebinar for today's meeting. And for those of you not familiar with GoToWebinar, we wanted to share a few tips. First off, each of you have a webinar dashboard on your desktop, similar to the one that's on the left-hand side of the screen there on the slide. The dashboard lets you see who is attending today, allows you to ask questions, and allows you to select your webcam preferences. So for your webcam preferences, you have a drop-down menu on the top of your screen, so you can select from View Everyone, View Who's Talking, View the Presenter. Unfortunately, there's no cat filter, but we do suggest you select either View Everyone or View Who is Talking for today's meeting to get the most out of it. And then most importantly, to ask a question in today's meeting, please click the triangle next to the Questions tab in your dashboard, highlighted there in the red box on the slide. And then once you've entered your question, send it to all, please. So for those of you attending by phone only, you can still submit and participate with questions by email. And so you can email the email sgmps@water.ca Again, sgmps@water.ca.gov. And our team will be tracking the questions, and we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we possibly can today. However, if we don't get to your question or you have follow-up questions, please email us at that same sgmps@water.ca.gov email. So next slide, please. Thank you. So it can't be understated that we're moving into a very important time in SGMA, which, thinking back from previous milestones, we've said the same thing. And really, that means that we're continuing to build off the work that has been done to date, and we're picking up momentum. And now we're at this new phase of SGMA where actions, implementation, and progress are truly the main focus. That's exciting because that's really, SGMA is hitting full stride in these first basins that have submitted plans. And there are so many actions happening on multiple fronts in the state on SGMA, from all of you at the local agency level that wrapped up plan development and went straight into the first year of implementing your plans, to the SGMA community with the increasing level of engagement and input, and to the dual actions of the state with reviewing the first wave of plans and providing assistance to support implementation. And that is exactly what is needed right now at the moment. Comprehensive action at all levels to tackle the tough challenges that we will face and continue to face implementing SGMA. And it's going to be hard work, as we know. It's long work, but it's important work. And to illustrate that, this slide shows these pictures, which we all know to be true, that California's groundwater is critically important to the long-term success and resiliency of our state and the various groundwater users of our state. Whether that's the communities that rely on groundwater for some portion of their water supply, or the many Californian farms that rely on groundwater, or the environmental resources or industries that support groundwater. So next slide, please. So again, with all those different interests and demands on the resource, again, it's not going to be easy, but it's important, and it's worth it because groundwater and the groundwater basins figuratively and literally support California. In a normal year, 40% of the state's water supply comes from groundwater, and in a drought year, it goes up to almost 60%. And we're really playing catch up in the groundwater world, where for 100 years, surface water has been actively managed across the state, and sustainable groundwater management is in year 6 of that effort. So we've been through a lot. There's a lot still ahead, and really, with both sides of the water cycle being managed, we're able to more effectively manage the state's overall water resources now, and more importantly, better prepare for our changing future, including future droughts, which we know will need to have a sustainable supply of groundwater to weather or withstand those droughts as they come in the future. So next slide, please. So this slide just shows at a very high level, simplistic level, the different phases that we've been through together on SGMA, whether it's the early framework setting of the regulations to the formation of the 250 plus groundwater sustainability agencies and the development and continuing development of groundwater sustainability plans. So a lot has been done. And so that orange box and arrow is sort of, we are here, and we're getting into this critical phase of full-scale plan implementation over the next 20 years. And that's of adaptive management, filling data gaps, finding solutions to these tough challenges that are out there to reach sustainability within 20 years, and then making measurable progress along the way and continuing that beyond for sustainability long-term. So next slide, please. So as we all know, SGMA, the scope and scale of SGMA is massive. And an example of this is all the different pieces that SGMA connects or is connected to, which shows the complexities of SGMA on one hand, but also the big opportunities that we have and we can have moving forward with groundwater management, which we know all of what's shown on this slide here is much bigger than just SGMA, but SGMA really is a connection across all these different really important topics. And that's why the governor and the administration have made SGMA a key priority action in the water resilience portfolio, calling for a continued commitment to SGMA implementation and really trying to bring all of the available resources to bear, whether that's the local, bringing locals, regional, state, and federal agencies together to help tackle these tough challenges that we know are ahead of us and that we're working through currently. And that's really meant to maximize the state support function that DWR and our sister agencies bring to the table, and also empowering the locals and SGMA community partners to continue developing innovative solutions that we can all bring to the table, and really sort of all of the above approach for us to be successful. So I know there's a lot there. We're going to get into more details of how we're going to be working together forward on this. Next slide, please. And so now we'll be getting into the first topic of our webinar here, which is the regulatory framework and GSP assessments. So we'll have Craig Altair, my colleague from DWR, who leads the GSP review efforts, and our colleague Nathan Casebeer from the State Board to go over these topics. And then we'll pause again for that question and answer session. So as we're going through this, you can submit those questions at any time and encourage you to do that, so we can queue those up and have those ready during those question and answer sessions. Okay, next slide, please. So just one final slide before I turn it over to Craig is just setting, again, some context of where the focus is right now at this moment in SGMA. Of the 515 groundwater basins across the state that make up that 40% to 60% of the state's supply are there on the left. Of the 100 or 94 to be exact, high and medium priority basins that are required to submit plans, we're really laser focused on those critically overdrafted basins that were first up to the plate and submitted their plans first about just over a year ago. And then there were some even basins that submitted early that are in the queue as well. So with that, I'll turn it over again to Craig Altair from Department of Water Resources to take it away. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. So good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to be able to speak today to what currently looks like 383 of you. So as Stephen mentioned, I'm Craig Altair. I'm an engineering geologist at DWR, and I lead our GSP review section here. So Stephen just briefly mentioned kind of which areas of the state were required to develop a GSP and by when. I'm going to take just a moment to kind of discuss what a GSP is briefly, and really very briefly. I could probably spend a whole day talking about GSPs, but I'm going to do it instead in a minute, in 2 slides. So I will let you know that it's going to be brief. If you have questions, of course, ask them. Follow up with the email that Stephen mentioned earlier, and then check out our website. We have a lot of good material on there, things like best management practices and the like. If you do have further questions after today, I'm also going to talk a bit about DWR's review and how we review and assess GSPs. So I want to remind everyone that our GSP regulations really kind of crystallize and formalize the requirements for what goes into a GSP, and builds on kind of what limited details were in SGMA, and identifies not just for the local agencies what needs to go into a GSP, but also how the department will review and assess GSPs. So shown on the slide are the 9 articles that are in our GSP regulations that were adopted in 2016 after an extensive public process that included workshops and hearings and public comment periods. I'm not going to go through the details of all nine articles today. I will point out Article 5, Plan Contents, that we'll talk about on the next slide, as well as Article 6, the Department's Evaluation and Assessment, that really guides our review, and we'll talk about that in subsequent slides. So I can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Okay, so that Article 5, Plan Contents. This again kind of includes what needs to go into a GSP. If you're a groundwater sustainability agency, if you're a GSA, and you're developing a plan, you're probably very familiar with this section. As well, if you're familiar with kind of pre-SGMA groundwater management plans, some of this material may seem pretty familiar to you. So things that need to go into a GSP include things like the administrative information. What are the agencies, or who are the agencies in your basin with water use authorities, with land use authorities? How have interested parties been identified and communicated and noticed to? Additionally, what's the basin setting? What's the hydrogeologic conceptual model? In other words, where are the aquifers horizontally and laterally? How do they work together? How does groundwater flow? What are the groundwater conditions in your basin? What is the water budget for the basin historically, currently, and then projected into the future, accounting for things like climate change? Again, those topics pretty familiar to pre-SGMA groundwater management, but SGMA introduced some new important terms. We call those the sustainable management criteria. And under that umbrella of sustainable management criteria are things like the sustainability goal for the basin. Pretty straightforward. It's basically what overall is trying to be achieved through implementation of a GSP. But more specifically, SGMA identifies that the basins need to define undesirable results. So where undesirable result is the significant and unreasonable occurrence of certain groundwater conditions. SGMA identifies that significant and unreasonable is the threshold for an undesirable result, but it leaves it to the local agencies to identify what for their basin is significant and unreasonable. Other sustainable management criteria include the minimum thresholds and measurable objectives. And those are the site-specific items that need to be identified. You can think of them as, for example, a groundwater level in a well. And those are the conditions that at those site-specific areas they want to either avoid in the case of a minimum threshold, or to achieve in the case of a measurable objective. And so that's not to say, and these are new, that's not to say that there weren't some pre-SGMA plans that included quantitative criteria for management, but they didn't all include that. And this is one of the new items, a very important item in SGMA. Additionally, once GSA has identified in their plan what conditions they want to achieve, they have to identify through subarticle 4, the monitoring network, how they're going to measure that those conditions are being achieved through implementation of their plan. And then finally, projects and management actions. So depending on what conditions are like in the basin today and what conditions the basin either hopes to achieve or to avoid through implementation of the plan, they need to identify certain projects or management actions to get there. Very broadly, that could include projects and actions more on the demand management side of things, or projects and actions more on the supply augmentation side of things. And in fact, more likely it'll be a mix of those two things throughout the state as local conditions warrant. And it's beyond the scope today to get into too much about what kinds of things we're seeing so far in terms of projects and management actions. But suffice it to say that it's a pretty broad spectrum of things that are being proposed right now. I want to mention kind of at the bottom right of this slide, there's a figure that shows some of the options for submitting a GSP. And kind of to distill it, there's a couple options. Most simply, on the left side of that figure, there can be a single agency in a basin, a single groundwater sustainability agency, that prepares a single plan, and they adopt and submit that plan to the department. The intermediate level of complexity is if there are multiple GSAs in the basin, and those multiple GSAs prepare a single GSP, a coordinated single GSP, and submit that to the department. And then at the most complex end of the spectrum, it's a case where in a basin or sub-basin there are multiple GSAs, and each of those GSAs prepares their own plan for their own area, and then they submit those multiple plans along with a required coordination agreement to the department. That required coordination agreement, you can think of it like an umbrella document that describes how those multiple GSPs will be operated as if they're one GSP to achieve the sustainability goal for the basin. So next slide. Thank you. So now we can see, and now we talked about what are the options, we can talk about what we got by our first statutory deadline, as Stephen mentioned earlier, January 2020, was the required date for the critically overdrafted basins to have adopted and submit their GSPs to the department. By that date, we did receive 43 GSPs from all 18 critically overdrafted basins that were required to submit them at that time. We also received 3 GSPs from non-critically overdrafted basins, but the basins that were medium and high priority. In other words, basins that would have been required to submit a GSP by 2022, and they just did so 2 years early. And then subsequently, later in 2020, we actually received our first GSP from a basin that is ranked low or very low priority. In other words, a basin that's not even required at all to do a groundwater sustainability plan, but that chose to do so of its own accord. Shown on the map are kind of the number of GSPs per basin. So we talked about the options that were out there: single plan prepared by an agency, a single plan prepared by multiple agencies. And in fact, many of the basins out there that we received plans for in 2020 took the option of multiple plans per basin. So shown in the different colors here are how many plans we received for various basins, up to 7 plans in a single basin. As you can imagine, even a single GSP prepared by a single agency for a basin is a pretty massively complicated document and complex. And in fact, some of these basins with multiple plans, I'd say are pretty massively complicated documents, tens of thousands of pages of technical information. So right now we have teams of engineers and scientists throughout the department, both in our region offices and at headquarters, who are reviewing all the plans that were submitted to us. And we have 2 years from the receipt of a plan to review and assess it and make our determination. As I'll mention subsequently again, we do aim to release some of our assessments earlier ahead of that 2-year timeline, really as soon as we can to get the message out to the GSAs, both that have the plans and that maybe are preparing plans, about again, what the good and the bad was for some of these basins, and we'll talk a little bit more about that momentarily. But before we do, if I can go to the next slide, I want to make it pretty clear what the outcomes of our assessment process are like, and I get a lot of questions about this. What choices does the department have when reviewing a GSP, or I should say not what choices, but what options do we have at the end of the day? And the bottom line is there are 3 options. And so this is an animated slide, I apologize. So next click. We have three options. A GSP at the end of the day can be either approved, incomplete, or inadequate. So we'll talk first about an approved GSP, and if you can give me the next click. So an approved GSP is one that, in the determination of the department, substantially complies with our GSP regulations and also complies with the objectives of SGMA. That doesn't mean that the plan is perfect, and in fact, no plan likely will be perfect. Even for GSPs that we approve, in the initial go, we will very likely, be giving some recommended corrective actions. Those are things to address some discrepancies that we may have identified in our review, and we really recommend that the GSAs take those recommended corrective actions seriously and try to implement them as soon as they can, in order to show that on an ongoing basis that they're likely to achieve their sustainability goal. So next click. Now the intermediate option is if we determine the plan to be incomplete. So what does that mean? That means that there is a minor deficiency, where a minor deficiency is defined as something that precludes approval. So it's big enough a deal that we couldn't approve the plan today, but we think that minor deficiency could be addressed within no more than 180 days. The 180 days was a period of time identified in our regulations. So next click. If we identify the plan is incomplete, we would assign certain corrective actions. So at this point, those no longer are recommended corrective actions, but they're required corrective actions, discrete actions to address by the agency. The agency would hopefully address those corrective actions, resubmit the changed portions of their plan to the department, and we'd evaluate it. If they've adequately addressed the corrective actions, the plan can be approved. And if they were not adequately identified, and if you can give me the next mouse click. And one more mouse click, thanks. If they were not adequately addressed, those corrective actions, then the GSP could be determined to be inadequate. And similarly, if right out of the gate there were significant deficiencies that could not be and addressed within 180 days, the plan could also be found to be inadequate. So an inadequate determination by the department does open the door for state intervention. My colleague from the State Board, in a couple more slides, will address the State Board's role in state intervention. But I do want to stress, and as I'm sure he will as well, that the ultimate goal, even if a basin does go to state intervention, the ultimate goal of the state is to get the basins back on track as soon as possible and back into this cycle of approved plans with implementation And that, again, is the goal of the state. So next slide. So this is my final slide. As has been mentioned already, 2021 is going to be a critical year. The first determinations of the first GSPs will be released. But I want to, one thing I want to take away from this discussion today and this slide is that SGMA is very much not a one and done scenario. Even plans that are approved, that's just the starting point, really. I know that a lot of work has been put in, to get to this point. It may not feel like this is the starting point, but that's really what it is. GSAs have been implementing their plans for only a year. They have 20 years to fully implement them. An approved plan, still there's a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of kind of showing your work to do. And so what I mean by that is that the regulations require and the law requires annual reports to be prepared, and those annual reports should document not just the data that's been collected during that year, but also the implementation progress each year. And then additionally, kind of more formally, every 5 years, or at least every 5 years, the basins are required to revisit their plan and provide a status update. We call those the 5-year updates. The department will, each of those 5-year check-ins, if you will, be performing an assessment to make sure that the basin is still on track to achieve its sustainability goal. Now, we certainly expect that the thresholds, the plans, the projects and management actions identified on day one are likely to change through adaptive management. A big part of SGMA is understanding the basin better and adaptively managing. So as the information improves, as understanding improves, these plans will likely change, and that's okay, as long as ultimately things are moving towards achieving sustainability, the sustainability goals that were defined locally by that into that 20-year period. I think I can stop there. I'm again look forward to questions later on, but I will right now transition to my colleague Nathan Casebeer from the State Water Board, who will talk about the State Board's role under SGMA.
Thanks, Craig. So as Craig said, I'm with the State Water Board Groundwater Management Program, and I'm going to talk about state intervention, or the board backstop. I'm going to go over the parts of state intervention, including probation and interim plans, and then I'll get into the timelines for state intervention. Some things to remember about state intervention are that the board will only intervene when local efforts fail. So we can't step in whenever we feel like it. State intervention temporarily protects the basin until the locals come up to speed. So again, it's a temporary process, as Craig mentioned. We're not trying to replace local management. We want it to get back on track under a GSP. State intervention is triggered by SGMA deadlines, so the next major deadline for plans being due at the end of next January. Next slide, please. So what does state intervention entail? Here's a general overview. When state intervention has been triggered, the board can designate the basin as probationary, and then local GSA or GSAs will have some time to remedy their plan deficiencies. And if that doesn't happen, the board may develop an interim plan for the basin. And I'll get into the specific timelines in a little bit. Next slide, please. So when a groundwater basin is put on probation, the State Water Board has the flexibility to make decisions to gather data or require meters on groundwater pumps. This is also a time when the local agency or agencies have the opportunity to fix their GSP issues before going under an interim plan. So again, we're trying to get them back on track. Next slide, please. And this one has some animation. So yeah, thanks. SGMA requires fees to recover the cost of the state intervention program. The fees were determined based on the predicted cost of the program, but could change in the future. So the fees include a base filing fee of $300 per well. Next click. A volumetric rate depending on where the basin is in the state intervention process, and then one more click. And then we also have an automatic late fee of 25%. Next slide, please. So extraction reports are required for groundwater pumpers in probationary basins, and in unmanaged areas of high and medium priority basins, and must be submitted annually. The reports require information on where the well is located, how much it can pump, how much is actually pumped on a monthly basis, and where the water is pumped to and how it's used. And reports will be submitted online through a data system called GEARS. Next slide, please. So GEARS stands for Groundwater Evaluation Analysis and Reporting System. It's an easy to use online data system that we built for collecting extraction reporting data. In GEARS, pumpers will log in, click on the location of their well, and click on where the water will be used to provide annual extraction reports. Next slide, please. When the board is considering a basin for probation, the board has the broad authority to conduct additional investigations to get the information it needs in case it has to prepare an interim plan. So these board investigations can include issuing informational orders to individual pumpers if we can't get data on a voluntary basis. Also, since we're required to recover the cost of the program, we will issue fees that are in addition to the groundwater extraction reporting fees if we have to do special investigations. Next slide, please. So we've covered the triggers and probation. Now we'll talk about what happens with an interim plan. Next slide. These are the main components of an interim plan. Corrective actions to get the basin back on track, monitoring to measure how implementation is going, a schedule for the corrective actions, and enforcement to make sure the plan is followed. Now, it's important to remember, again, stressing that the interim plan is temporary. It's meant to fix issues and get the GSA back in control towards sustainability. And also, it's important to note that since the interim plan is meant to be temporary, demand management, which is cutting back on pumping, is the most likely corrective action that will be used in state water board interim plans. First of all, it's the quickest option. And also, it's unlikely that the state water board will be augmenting supplies, such as by creating water recycling projects or building desalination plants. Now that we've gone over the different parts of state intervention, I'm going to go into a little more detail on the timelines for probation and interim plans. Next slide, please. So the first scenario is, what if there's no plan turned in by the GSP deadline? So in this case, we're looking forward to next January. Next click. Then the first step would be a 90-day noticing requirement for a probationary hearing. During this time, there will be close coordination between the State Water Board and DWR. Next click, please. After a probationary determination, the GSAs have 180 days to remedy the deficiencies that cause the basin to have that probationary determination. And if the deficiencies are not corrected during the 180-day period, then the board can start developing its interim plan for the basin. Next click. Okay, great. And so maybe to make this easier, we could just click this one out. There's 4 clicks on this one. Thanks. There will be, so this is the scenario where DWR determines a plan to be incomplete. Now, when a plan is incomplete, it's not in state intervention, it's not in the water board's house, it's still with DWR. And as Craig mentioned before, there's 180 days to fix issues in the plan. If those issues are not fixed, then DWR could potentially determine the plan is inadequate. And so it moves on to the state board intervention process. So if it's determined inadequate, then we have a 90-day noticing requirement for probationary hearing, just like before. And then once there's a probationary determination, in this case, there's extra time, up to a year, to remedy those deficiencies before the state board starts developing an interim plan. And recall, during probation, the basin's in probation, so the state board can require groundwater extraction reports, we can require meters, issue informational orders, anything that's needed to, in case we need to develop an interim plan. Next slide, please. And this one has 3 clicks on it. You can just click them out. So if DWR determines the plan to be inadequate, this is got the same information as the last slide. So once that determination is made, there's the 90-day noticing requirement for probationary hearing. And once that's probationary determination is made, there's the time to remedy the deficiencies and for the state board to gather the information that it needs to prepare for an interim plan development. Next slide. So right now, what are we doing right now? Well, we're focused on coordination and supporting DWR's review of the plans. The boards have extensive regulatory experience in certain areas, especially around drinking water, water quality, water rights, and other areas. Coordination is ongoing between the groundwater management program and other parts of the state and regional boards to draw on the agency expertise to support the plan review. Next slide, please. And the reason why we're coordinating is because SGMA fits into a broader framework of water quality, drinking water, public trust, and other issues. SGMA wasn't designed to fix all of these issues by itself, but it does include tools that GSAs can apply to address these issues. Next slide, please. So here's another puzzle slide. This example shows how SGMA fits into water quality issues. So this slide shows a number of different water quality programs that are implemented by the state and regional water boards. Again, SGMA is not intended to take over or replace these programs, but it can work in combination with these programs, largely on issues going forward. Next slide. And this slide's just a plug for our fact sheets, which are available on our website at waterboards.ca.gov/SGMA. These are all under the resources for GSAs link. And just want to point out, we have fact sheets on state intervention, water quality, funding, and some links to water rights information. So that's my portion of the webinar, and I'm going to pass it over to Stephen to finish out this part of the webinar.
All right, thank you, Nathan, and thank you, Craig. So we wanted to go to the next slide and just wrap up this regulatory discussion before we get into the first Q&A with just touching on the many comments we received on these first 40 plus plans. The department received about 500 public comments on these first plans that we have reviewed and are considering as part of our technical reviews. And this number doesn't include, this 500 number doesn't include the hundreds of comments that were submitted to GSAs on draft GSPs. And so the comments we received, and as the pictures show, really ranged. There's a broad spectrum of the 80 different organizations, whether that was local agencies, state or federal agencies, tribal governments, NGOs, the public, were all engaged and part of this process in commenting to the GSA specifically and commenting to the department. And this active stakeholder engagement is really a great thing and indicates the interest and commitment to making SGMA successful and the commitment to the local planning process. And it illustrates that these first GSPs are not perfect. However, it's important to note, as mentioned earlier, perfection is not the goal, but progress is, and especially in these first plans. And so really these comments and this feedback are narrowing and focusing our view on those areas that need more attention, need more support by the locals, by the state to continue moving forward, as it's an important thing to bring a diverse group together in these basins and across the state, because when we do that, we have more of a potential for finding solutions, whether that's bringing funding or new sources of funds, technical support, or on that all important on the ground or place-based knowledge that so many have that are living and working in these basins across the state. So we just wanted to touch on that we are and have reviewed and are looking at these comments as part of our review of these first wave of plans. And again, there's many different commonalities of these comments that we've received. And we'll continue on, and we really encourage comments to be submitted as we move forward, and commenting and engagement is really a process, a long-term process, not a short-term product of this, and as we move through the 20-year SGMA implementation horizon. So with that, we'll go to the next slide, and this is where we can open it up for the first question and answer session. Thank you for sitting through that first series of slides and information. We hope it was helpful for you, and it has generated a number of questions that we have been queuing up here. So if we go to the next slide, please. So I'll be working with colleagues on the call as well, and we'll be queuing up the different team members that we have to answer the questions. And then Melissa Sparks-Krantz from DWR SGMA team will be reading out the questions, and then our teams will be answering them as we go. So Melissa, can you read the first question for us, please?
Yes, thanks, Stephen. Our first question is going to go to DWR, and I'll direct it to Craig Altair. So how is it decided which route the GSAs go? How is it decided the number of GSPs there are related to the number of GSAs for a given basin? So just orienting us to the lay of the land locally.
Yeah, so in terms of which route the GSAs go, yeah, I assume that from the next sentence that kind of refers to number of agencies, number of plans in a basin, and that's entirely a local decision. I think that there's been a variety of reasons why basins have gone the approach of either multiple agencies, multiple GSAs, or multiple plans, oftentimes due to just different geographic areas of governance within a basin. The advantage of a single plan, single GSA is relatively simpler coordination, simpler documentation. The GSP regulations do include some requirements for a multiple plan scenario that in that coordination agreement that the multiple plans are using things like the same data and methodologies, and the more plans, the more more complexity it takes to show that all of them are in fact using, again, things like same data and methodologies and that sort of thing. But bottom line, it's a local decision.
Great, thank you, Craig. We have a few more questions here specifically for you, Craig. So I'll tee them up. And just for the audience awareness, we are trying to group similar questions. We're seeing a lot of questions in the questions box, so thank you for submitting those. We'll group similar questions and try and tee up as many answers as we can. So for basin setting that was mentioned, you mentioned evaluating future impacts such as climate change. What about future changes in a watershed? And this person cited an example such as dam removal. How are those being addressed in a plan?
I mean, anything that could affect the inflow of surface water or groundwater into the basin itself, could be considered. And I'd say if it's reasonably likely that that those things would happen, then they arguably should be considered. But I think again, sort of there's some certain requirements for things specifically like climate change. As far as those upstream watershed changes, it may be that that's something that's addressed through adaptive management. Some of those changes are maybe unforeseen today, and so that doesn't mean that an agency doesn't ever need to consider it, though, if those situations occur. If there's a significant change in the upstream watershed during implementation, that should be accounted for in subsequent updates to the plan. Agencies can't necessarily predict the future today, but they do need to account for changes as they occur through that adaptive management process.
Great, Craig, and we have one more here for you. Do the measures of the sustainable management criteria include both groundwater quality and quantity?
They do. This may be one of the few presentations I haven't gone through each of the 6 groundwater conditions that are associated with undesirable results. We call those the sustainability indicators. But yes, those sustainability indicators do include groundwater levels and groundwater quality. Specifically, just to rattle off the 6 for those that aren't familiar, the 6 conditions that could be undesirable are kind of chronic lowering of groundwater levels, reduction of groundwater storage, degraded water quality, seawater intrusion, land subsidence, and depletions of interconnected surface waters. So they definitely do include water quality and levels.
Great,
Okay.
Thank you, Craig. This next question will be for Stephen Springhorn. Do DWR and the state board have any plans or anticipate any actions / measures for low priority basins?
Thank you, Melissa. And before I answer that, I just wanted to note that for some of the more common questions about whether the slides will be available or recording, those are being responded to in the dashboard, the GoToWebinar dashboard. Just wanted to highlight that. So to the question, yes, we do know that there's a huge focus on the high and medium priority basins because those are the basins that are required to do groundwater sustainability plans. However, we also know that there's 515 groundwater basins in this state, as well as non-basin areas where groundwater is an important component to communities and other and environmental interests. So a couple of things I'd like to highlight here is we have some programs such as the California State Groundwater Elevation Monitoring Program, or CASGEM program, which was passed, seems like a long time ago, back in 2009 and fully implemented in 2011, where any basin can volunteer or become a groundwater monitoring entity, and then to start to track groundwater levels in those low or very low basins or even non-basin areas, to see how groundwater conditions are changing over time, which is a really fundamental data set that's needed to understand groundwater systems in a particular basin. So that's one. Another is the fact that SGMA applies to all 515 groundwater basins. So as Craig mentioned during his slides, that we have received a GSP from a low priority basin. And so a groundwater sustainability agency and a groundwater sustainability plan can be submitted in those basins. And then finally, more on the technical assistance side of things, we are trying to increase our awareness, understanding of the wells that are across the entire state, the groundwater levels that are across the entire state, the land use that we know is very connected to groundwater use. We have statewide land use data sets. I'll talk more about that during the assistance slides. So we are really trying to increase the amount of information available in these low and very low basins, as well as non-basin areas. And one of the documents that we really are compiling all of this and making this information available is California's Groundwater Bulletin 118. We are very close, and I'll talk about this later, to releasing a public review draft of the latest update of that document. And it has a lot of increased information in these particular areas that the question is on. So I'll leave it there, but happy to follow up if needed. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Stephen. We actually have one more question for you as well. There's a specific question for the 2022 basins. Is there an opportunity to extend the deadline for plan submittal for these 2022 basins? The attendee notes that they're having difficulty with public engagement during COVID. So if you have a response for them, that would be helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. Thanks for that question. And we fully appreciate and recognize, and just the fact that we're virtual right now, is that COVID has really impacted all of us across the state and across the world. And so we do acknowledge that. However, we as DWR do not have the authority to change deadlines that are in statute in SGMA. And so we don't have that ability to change or the board to change those statutory requirements. And so without that happening and moving forward with the deadlines that are on in the water code, again, we acknowledge that COVID has really really led to changes and approaches and those type of things that we want to make sure that engagement does happen, but we also acknowledge that engagement is evolving as we react to this global pandemic, and knowing that engagement is not, again, a one-time thing in the first plan. It's a continuous process through plan implementation. And so although engagement may be limited a little bit because of COVID or however much, we do recognize that we as the state are trying to provide guidance on how to overcome some of those challenges. And so I would encourage you to reach out to us at DWR in our headquarters office, as well as our colleagues in our four regional offices that are really on the ground and in a lot of these meetings and can help provide assistance and insight on this particular question. But really, to sum it up, we don't have the ability to change the statutory deadlines at DWR.
Thank you, Stephen. I have another question for Craig, and then we'll have another question for the State Water Board staff on the line. So Craig, the next question for you. Looking at the approved GSP plans, if a GSP is approved and wants to implement those recommended corrective actions, must they submit an amended GSP to the department? Or can they simply implement these recommended corrective actions during that implementation period and provide their 5-year update?
Good question. So ultimately, it's up to the agency when they need to amend their plan. So I'll say that kind of right out of the gate. The department will say you have to amend your plan now versus later. I would say that for this case, that's something that I believe can be done during implementation, and not that shouldn't require an amendment. The initial plans are adopted, submitted to the department, we make our decisions, but even from day one, we know that basins are implementing certain actions. And in fact, the basins with plans that are under review are implementing certain actions, and that's great. And because those agencies have the powers and authorities to implement their plans once they're adopted. They don't have to wait for the department to do their review. And so there's actions that are happening today that are part of implementation, don't require amendments today. Similarly, those plans that are approved with certain recommended corrective actions, and if they want to address those, which is again strongly encouraged, they should do that as part of implementation. They can document it not only in the 5-year updates, but also in those annual reports to us, and then they can decide. The agencies can decide for themselves if they need to do that amendment process, which there is some language in the water code and in our regulations about how amendments are done. There's some noticing requirements and that sort of thing. So if you decide to go that route of amending your plan at any point, I would encourage you to check out those requirements for the amendment process. But I think by and large, this kinds of implementation things will be things that can be reported on in the periodic updates.
Great, thank you, Craig. I'd like to just tee up one more question for you. There is a clarifying question. Will you be issuing all of the GSP reviews at once or staggering them? And can you explain how the department is going to be releasing the assessments? Sure.
Yeah, I mean, the plan right now is that we're going to stagger our assessments. So the first ones that will come are very much likely going to be from those basins with a single plan, and also very likely basins that don't have a lot of adjacent basin, both coordination and physical interaction to deal with. That's very likely to be the first slug, which again we hope to release relatively soon. Those plans that are more complex, whether it's multiple plans in a basin or a lot of adjacent basin interactions, will likely take more time, and in some cases very much will likely take very close to the 2 years, the entire 2 years that we have to review plans. So yeah, I think there's still certainly plenty of approvals we need to get before we release any of our determinations. So there's a bit of uncertainty there about the timing exactly, but we do hope that relatively soon that first batch of plan assessments to be released. So does that answer the question, Melissa?
Great, thank you so much, Craig. So this next question will be for one of our State Water Board staff, Sarah Sugar, on the line. The presentation touched on State Water Board fees. Can you explain, do these fees apply to municipal, domestic, and stock wells?
Hey, thanks, Melissa. And yes, just because I haven't spoken yet, my name is Sarah Sugar, and I'm a senior environmental scientist at the State Water Board. Starting next week, I'll be acting lead for our SGMA program. And so the generally fees do apply to all extractions within the basin after the State Board designates the basin probationary. The statute does allow the board some limited flexibility in who's required to report extractions and submit associated fees. So the board can decide that part of the basin is subject to a local plan or program that adequately manages groundwater within that portion of the basin, and can accept sort of pumpers within that part of the basin from reporting and fees. And then the board can also decide that a certain class or category of extractions are likely to have a minimal impact on basin withdrawals and can accept those pumpers from fees. But the default is all extractors will have to report to us and submit associated fees.
Great, thank you, Sarah. We have received a lot of questions. We hope we've answered some of them live today, and we will be following up on the questions submitted. So please continue to submit questions. We do want to ensure that we can continue with the presentation on the state assistance side. And so we're going to tee up our next speaker and turn it back to Stephen Springhorn.
All right, thank you, Melissa. So if we could go to the next slide, please. As Melissa mentioned, for this portion of the presentation, we'd like to be highlighting the various forms of our either existing or upcoming technical, financial, and planning assistance that we're aligning to support our regulatory decisions and plan implementation as we move forward. So if we could go to the next slide, and just as a reminder, we will have a Q&A session after these set of slides. So again, please continue to be submitting your questions in that questions box. So this slide shows sort of the toolbox concept where each basin is unique. Each basin is going to need a different set of tools and assistance and regulatory actions to move forward through SGMA implementation. And so what we're trying to do at the state, working with our colleagues at the board and other state agencies and other external partners that we have that are doing a lot of great work in this area too, is to really come up with a portfolio of tools, data sets that we can provide and that are strategically aligned to the requirements that are in the groundwater sustainability plans or that are highlighted in assessments that will be coming out this year. So just on the screen, again, this shows a list of the different technical assistance, financial assistance, planning assistance that my colleague Keith Wallace will go into more in detail, and we have a number of slides that are going to be showcasing these different types of assistance. But I want to mention that we really want to promote feedback, because assistance is only as good as how useful it is to the stakeholder communities or the local agencies that are needing it. So we do really encourage you all to give us feedback, whether it's in the comments from today or as we move forward together, because that'll really help us align the different assistance activities to make them most useful on the ground. So then let's see here, we can go to the next slide, and then as we're transitioning to the next slide, there are some data sets that really lend themselves to an economy of scale to make the investment at the state level on behalf of the GSAs. And then we'll highlight some of those that we've done previously, but again, we're really looking to feedback as we go to full implementation mode of what are those data sets that we know are transcending GSA boundaries, basin boundaries, where for consistency, if we have a common set of data that we can put out there for all to use, if they want to, that would be ideal. So I'll turn this over to Keith Wallace, who leads the DWR outreach and engagement section in our group, among many other things that he works on for our team. Take it away, Keith.
Thanks, Stephen. As he said, my name is Keith Wallace. I'm the chief of the outreach and engagement section in DWR Sustainable Groundwater Management Office. And as Stephen also mentioned, we have 3 categories of assistance: financial planning and technical assistance. And I want to go through each of those a little bit today. I'm gonna first start with our financial assistance. So we call ourselves SGMA, Sustainable Groundwater Management Office. We've worked with our department's financial assistance branch over the last several years to develop 2 grant programs to support with SGMA implementation. The first one being the Sustainable Groundwater Planning Grant Program, and the second being the Sustainable Groundwater Management Implementation Grant Program. And so first I want to just provide a little bit of a summary of the Planning Grant Program, which it's designed to help develop groundwater sustainability plans. We have funded 3 rounds so far with a combination of both Proposition 1 and Proposition 68 dollars. Most recently, we awarded, or let's just say the last round of funding was awarded in March of 2020, bringing the total award to right around $150 million. Unfortunately, we don't have any more funding available for the Planning Grant Program just yet, but we'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. As for the Implementation Grant Program, this is intended to construct projects that will help implement groundwater sustainability plans. So it's a relatively new program. In fact, we just kicked off our first solicitation at the very end of 2020, and we had applications due on January 8th of this year. And so we have $26 million available for this first round, and it's for projects in critically overdrafted basins. We are planning to announce next month, and we anticipate final awards to be made in May. And then we'll start a second round of funding in 2022, where there's about $70 million available for that round. And so if you would like some more information about our grant programs, you can check out our Sustainable Groundwater Management, our financial assistance website. So one more thing to note, just as it relates to financial assistance, in addition to these 2 grant programs, in this year's governor's budget, so for the fiscal year 21-22, DWR has requested $60 million in general funds to be made available for grants to support both GSP development and refinement, and then also GSP implementation in the critically overdrafted basins. So the idea would be that this would be a hybrid planning and implementation style grant solicitation, as we recognize there's still a need for both types of efforts. So this is going through the legislative approval process right now. And so this is not a done deal by any means, but there did appear to be fairly broad support for this budget request during this month's Assembly Budget Subcommittee, which was on February 3rd. Thank you to those that voiced your support during that hearing. As a state agency, we can't advocate for our own funding requests other than answering questions that are asked of us in a hearing. However, if any of you are interested in this process and would like to tune in, the Senate Budget Subcommittee hearing is going to be on March 2nd. Next slide, please. So planning assistance. We recognize that preparing groundwater sustainability plans requires a significant amount of planning and coordination. So we've developed a number of resources to support outreach and engagement activities. Most recently, we developed tips and tactics for online meetings. We recognize that trying to conduct meetings in this remote environment can be challenging, so we want to provide some guidance materials there. We also prepared guidance documents for how to engage with stakeholders. That took place several years ago, but we are currently working on some additional materials to support outreach and engagement efforts. And we anticipate to release those within the next few weeks. We'll announce that through our listserv and our newsletter, and those things will be available on our website. We also have points of contacts, regional coordinators, and geology leads. So we've assigned, using our regional office staff, we've assigned a dedicated point of contact to each of the high and medium priority basins. And so these POCs, they participate in GSA meetings, and they're available at all times to answer questions that you all may have. They're really the conduit between the local planning efforts and what's happening within the department. Next we have facilitation support services. As with most things related to water, coordination and collaboration, can be challenging. And there are times when there's a benefit to having a neutral third party to facilitate discussions. So we have a contract where we make professional facilitators available upon request to GSAs or those entities that are working closely with GSAs, to provide facilitation services. And you can apply for those services on a continuous basis using our website. And then lastly, we have what are called written translation services. This is a relatively new service that we've been providing. So as part of that facilitation contract that we have a team of translators that can translate written notices, letters, forms, presentations, fact sheets, those kinds of things in up to 8 different languages. So similar to facilitation services, you can request this service on a continuous basis. And so, for more information, about these planning assistance components, including how to apply, for facilitation or written translation services, or how to identify who your POC is, you can visit our assistance and engagement webpage. Next slide, please. So lastly, we want to talk very quickly about our technical assistance. We break the technical assistance down into 3 different areas: technical support services, guidance and education, and then statewide data sets and tools. So what our technical support services entails, it's similar to the facilitation program where we have we've obtained a contract to where we provide you all access to, or can provide you access to, contractors that can provide specific services upon request. Those include monitoring well installation, subsidence monitoring, and also downhole camera surveys. And so similar to facilitation and written translation services, you can apply for these services on a continuous basis. And if you are interested in applying for those services, we recommend that you contact your point of contact that I mentioned above, and they will get you in contact with our project manager for this program and get you started on working on an application. As for guidance and education, we have our website. Obviously, that's our primary way for highlight what services we have available. But we also have best management practices and guidance documents. In fact, we've prepared 6 BMPs over the years and 4 guidance documents, to help with the GSP preparation. And then lastly, under guidance and education, we have what's called our California Groundwater Update 2020. Some of you may be more familiar with it as Bulletin 118. Stephen's going to talk about this in a little bit more detail in a minute. And then lastly, as part of our technical assistance, we have our statewide data sets and tools. So this includes the collection of data sets and tools, and I'm going to actually turn it over to Stephen here to talk a little bit more about this. I think Tyler and Catherine will also go into this in more detail. So Stephen, take it away.
All right, thank you, Keith. So if we could go to the next slide. Okay, so as Keith mentioned, we are working on a number of statewide data sets, where we feel as the state, it makes most sense to invest on behalf of the GSAs and the SGMA community to make these data sets available that are a consistent format, that are easily accessible and can be used for a variety of purposes. And so there are a couple that we wanted to highlight today that have either just come out recently or are almost going to be out soon. And really, again, we're trying to target these data sets to have the most impact for GSP development and then GSP implementation and adaptive management over time, and really trying to align to the annual report time frame, because we know that's where a lot of the transaction is going to happen through the 20-year implementation horizon. So the first data set that we'd like to spotlight is the SGMA water year type data set. This went out at the end of January. This is a data set that we had put in the regulations saying that's something that we would provide, and it's something that has gone out. It's an optional data set. So if you would want to use this water year type data set for your water budgeting or some of those other requirements in the planning process that utilizes water year type, that is available on our website now. And information on that went out in our SGMA newsletter in January. The next data set I'd like to spotlight is the statewide land use data set, particularly the latest version, which is the 2018 statewide land use data set. This comes as the next installment of this type of data, which we have put out 2014 and 2016 statewide data sets for land use. Those are available on a variety of platforms that we have online. And really what is different with this 2018 statewide data set is working with our consultant team and regional office land use groups. It's multi-crop information. So it's not just the summer growing season, it has multi-crop information for the state, which is a big improvement and a lot more information that can be used for SGMA and many other use cases. So we are actively getting that ready to be released. We are shooting for a spring timeframe to get that out, and that'll be, again, a nice data set to be used as we move forward. The next data set I'd like to highlight is the statewide INSAR data set. Like the land subsidence data, we've been producing statewide INSAR data or satellite-based subsidence information for a number of years now, and this will be the next tranche of data. So the current data set goes from January, roughly 2015, to September of 2019. This next batch of data will go from October of 2019 to September of 2020. And so we are shooting for a spring or March timeframe to get that out and available. And how we'll do that is by putting it on what's shown on the screen here, the SGMA data viewer, as well as the California Natural Resources Agency open data platform. And one other thing I'd like to highlight is that we do have a number of interactive maps. The SGMA data viewer is the one shown on the screen. On our data and tools page, there's a link at the bottom there on a variety of topics, from well completion reports to natural communities commonly associated with groundwater and many others that are there and available. But one thing to spotlight on the SGMA data viewer is we added a new category that's highlighted there, the current conditions. As we know, unfortunately, there are some dry conditions that we are facing, and knowing that we're hoping for the best but planning for the worst, we and our team have been developing and trying to synthesize groundwater information to make it readily available and have more quote unquote real-time information out there. And that's what's shown on the screen is a statistical analysis of the groundwater data that we have and looking at how the current measurement in every one of those wells compares to the history of those wells. So it gives you an idea of the latest conditions at each one of those wells and how it compares, whether it's above normal, normal, or below normal. And so this gives us a live look at groundwater levels across the state. So that's just one example of an improvement, and we'll be working towards improving this SGMA data viewer and other data sets as we move forward, and really want to get your input on what data sets are most needed as well. Okay, next slide, please. So as mentioned previously, there's been a lot of effort to develop the latest update on California's groundwater, Bulletin 118. This is a legacy document that's been around for decades, starting all the way back in the predecessor of the bulletin back in 1950s. There's been periodic updates of this, and it really has, over time, has been a compendium of technical information on the state of California's groundwater. And as we all know, the state of California's groundwater and the information generated right now through SGMA and other things has really changed. And so this document is really at that transition. This particular update is really at that transition of compiling all the information that we've got from the past to where we stand now, and really getting ready for all the information that's going to be coming through SGMA that we can be compiling as we move forward. So the latest is that this public review draft of this document is going through final approvals. We are really ready to push that out as soon as we can. And when that happens, that will initiate a 45-day public comment period. So you can review it and provide comments if you're interested. We will finalize into the summer months and then get that final document out and begin working on the next iteration of California's Groundwater Bulletin 118, knowing that there's so much information to still be collected as we move forward. So if you're interested in more information on that, we do have a Cal Groundwater website you can take a look. All right, so next slide, please. And I'll turn it over now to my colleague, Tyler Hatch, who leads our modeling and tools support section for DWR SGMA team. Tyler, it looks like you might be muted. Nope, can't hear you. Nope. So there's maybe a mute on your phone or the mute button on the GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar. Nope, still can't hear you. So I think in the interest of time, I might just keep moving. If you want to try, Tyler, keep trying to, and just cut me off if you are able to jump in here. One particular tool that the department has invested in for a long time now is the C2V SIM model, which is the Central Valley groundwater surface water model shown there in one of the figures. Our team has been investing in that, and Tyler is leading the group that has been updating and improving the model, which the current version is the C2V SIM Fine Grid version 1.0. That's through engagement that Tyler and the team have been working with GSAs and other stakeholders to get information and also provide information on groundwater models, and really using this as a tool to inform groundwater sustainability planning moving forward. So we are committed to keeping C2V SIM up to date as we move forward, and Tyler's team it will be doing that as we move forward. So if you have additional questions for Tyler, please reach out to him and see how you might be able to use C2V SIM and the other modeling products that he and the team are working on. And again, that latest version of the model is available on the Open Data platform at the link there on the slide. So we'll go to the next slide. Oh, yes.
Of course, right at the end, right?
Yeah, please feel free to add anything that I missed Thanks, Tyler.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add is that obviously C2 VSIM is a model that we're committed to providing. It's in the regulations that we would provide it, and so we're working hard to make sure that it's useful and relevant to everybody for historical water budgets, looking at data gaps and information, and then trying to keep it up to date and available, and work with all the local agencies to make sure we have the latest and greatest information. So with that, I'll pass it off to Catherine to talk about AEM.
Great. Let's see. Thanks, Tyler. Hi, all. I am Catherine DeLubac. I am the project manager for DWR's statewide airborne electromagnetic, or AEM, surveys, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to provide you all with an update today. So first, a bit about the method. AEM is a geophysical method in which the equipment is towed beneath the helicopter. And this allows us to collect data over large areas relatively quickly. The AEM method measures the electromagnetic response of subsurface materials down to a depth of about 1,000 feet. And we can relate that electromagnetic response of the materials to aquifer properties. And we can create continuous two-dimensional images of the subsurface. And this information provides a unique understanding of the large-scale, regional, and also the local aquifer structure. And that supports the development of hydrogeologic conceptual models, groundwater models, and groundwater sustainability plans. So the statewide surveys are funded through Proposition 68 and also general funds. And we will be collecting data in all of the high and medium priority basins in California. We'll be collecting data in a coarse grid. So we'll have a grid spacing of between 3 and 6 miles. DWR will be defining the flight lines, and we will try to be orienting those flight lines to ensure that we are collecting data over important areas. Important areas being, for example, areas with known data gaps, or areas where adjacent to critical infrastructure like the State Water Project, or areas where GSAs are considering implementing recharge projects. So let's see, we've recently awarded a contract to conduct the surveys, and the surveys will be starting this summer and will continue throughout the state over the next several years. Let's see, the survey schedule is being developed, and as it becomes ready, we'll keep it updated and posted on our website. So an important part of this project is our public and GSA outreach, and we'll be starting that effort this spring with an AEM webinar. So the purpose of this AEM webinar will be to provide, of course, many more details about the project, but also to request that GSAs provide DWR with existing data, data that are essential to a successful AEM survey. Specifically, we'll be asking for high-quality digitized lithology logs and geophysical logs, but more details to come on that request at the AEM webinar. Additionally, over the next several years, we will be continuing our outreach to GSAs and the public prior to collecting a survey within an individual basin. So the purpose for that GSA outreach will be to get information from the GSAs on those important areas within their basins so that we can incorporate that information into our flight line planning. And the purpose of the outreach with the public will be to keep the public informed and updated on when and where we're flying. So if you would like more information about the program, please visit our newly launched AEM website or join us for the AEM webinar this spring. And I believe that wraps up DWR's assistance presentations, and I'll hand it over to the State Water Board to provide more information about their SGMA related assistance. Thanks.
Thanks, Catherine. To leave time for Q&A, I'm going to breeze through these slides, but I have hyperlinks to all of the programs I'll discuss on the slides, which should be made available after this webinar. So the State Water Board has a few different programs and grant funding opportunities for GSAs as they start to implement projects and management actions and work on finishing or updating their GSPs. The first I'll touch on are water rights for groundwater recharge projects. I know a lot of the GSPs have included groundwater recharge as part of the portfolio of how they'll meet, sort of achieve sustainability in their basins. And some of these projects may need new water rights or changes to water rights. The State Water Board's Division of Water Rights has made a lot of resources available to try to clarify how water right permitting works for groundwater recharge projects and the many different pathways that GSAs and other groups have in pursuing water rights for groundwater recharge. We have 4 on this slide here. Check out the division's webpage and reach out to the Division of Water Rights if you have more questions on sort of first steps to pursuing groundwater recharge. Next slide, please. And when considering groundwater recharge projects, the Division of Water Rights has made this tool available to give an idea of where water might be available to appropriate. So over the decades, the State Water Board has designated some stream systems as fully appropriated, meaning that sort of all of the water available to appropriate has been appropriated by existing water right holders, either part of the year or all of the year. So in the red, you'll see stream systems that are fully appropriated year-round, and in blue, stream systems that are fully appropriated part of the year. So the Division of Water Rights has mapped out all of these decisions so that users can sort of see the limitations of appropriating water in different watersheds. Next slide, please. Now, DWR has more funding specific to GSAs and SGMA, but the State Water Board does have several grant programs that might be applicable to GSAs as they start implementing projects. We have the Water Recycling Funding Program, the Small Community Grant Fund. Next slide, please. Well, there are 2 other funding programs listed on that slide, if other people are having trouble seeing it. And if you have questions on those funding programs, you can reach out to our Division of Financial Assistance and they can help you out. Great. And finally, I just wanted to highlight a few different data sources that the State Water Board has available for GSAs as they update their plans and sort of flesh out basin settings and identify beneficial users of water. For water quality, we have a number of plans or a number of tools that are all available on our GAMA program page, GAMA being Groundwater Ambient Monitoring and Assessment Program. We have the GAMA Groundwater Information System, which has water quality data compiled from several sources. We have our USGS Trend Analysis tool, which allows you to come in and look at water quality trends in different areas for 38 different analytes. And then we have a domestic well water quality tool, which estimates water quality in domestic wells as part of our statewide needs analysis for drinking water. Next slide. And here I just want to highlight that our GAMA program has put a lot of work into making data accessible in a way that's useful to GSAs. So you can view and download water quality data by groundwater basin and by GSA sort of boundaries. And next slide. And finally, we have a few drinking water systems. We have Drinking Water Watch, which is also known as our CIDWS database. This has important data on all of the public water systems in the state, contact information, their sources of water, public water systems by county. And then finally, we have information on exceedance and compliance of public water systems that has information on which public water systems already have problems in your basins. With that, I'll hand it back to Keith. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So real quick, and I know we're running up against time, and just want to let everybody know we're gonna go a little bit long to be able to make some additional time available for our second Q&A session. But just this last slide, I want to talk a little bit about how we recognize that there has already been significant efforts undertaken by the GSAs and their stakeholders, and we absolutely appreciate those efforts. But as this timeline shows, there's still a lot more to do, and we've talked about this periodically throughout this webinar. But those things include submitting annual reports, developing 5-year updates, the GSPs, implementing local projects and management actions, and then outreach and engagement activities are going to have to be ongoing throughout all of these efforts. And so we wanted to point out, or just make sure it's very clear, that while there's still obviously a lot more to do on the local side, that we here at the state will continue to provide the technical planning and financial assistance that we've talked about today. And so we will do the best of our abilities to continue to support all of your efforts. And if you want to look for additional information on the assistance programs we talked about today, please check out our assistance and engagement webpage. In addition to this information, the site also includes links to prior recordings of past events and workshops, and we'll also, as we've talked about, we'll have this webinar available online as well. So with that, I want to transition to the next question and answer session. So next slide, please. Just a reminder, you are free to enter your questions in the dashboard here, but you can also email any questions you may have to our email listserv. Next slide, please. Thank you. There we go. Yeah, so we have the email address present there. And so why don't we go ahead and open it up for questions. Melissa, did you have some questions for us?
Thanks, Keith. There are several questions here. I'd actually like to direct the first 2 questions to you. Okay. The first question is regarding the funding assistance that you touched on. The question is, are the Sustainable Groundwater Management Planning and Implementation Grant Programs exclusively reserved for critically overdrafted basins, or are basins that are not critically overdrafted eligible to apply for these funds as well to support their GSP efforts?
Great question, thank you. So the planning grant program awarded 3 rounds of funding towards. There were no restrictions. It was open to all basins that were required to prepare groundwater sustainability plans. This first round of the implementation grant program was specific to critically overdrafted basins because that is what was directed to the department in last year, so fiscal year 2021, the governor's budget. The legislature directed us to make that funding available to critically overdrafted basins in an accelerated manner. The remaining funding for the implementation grant program funded by Proposition 68 will be open to high and medium priority basins, so non-critically overdrafted basins.
Great, thank you. The next question, Keith, for you is a good question here. So the attendee says, I recently saw the Department of Conservation SGMA Watershed coordinator funding. And can you tell us how that is aligned with DWR and the State Water Board SGMA programs?
Yeah, sure, great question. So we have been coordinating with other state agencies, state programs. SGMA implementation is there are other let's just say SGMA implementation itself is really complementary to a lot of other state regulatory and assistance programs. Even the water resilience portfolio it has actions for other state agencies to support signal implementation. This being one of them. And so the Watershed Coordinator Program, its primary goal is to improve watershed areas and groundwater sustainability by supporting local watersheds and groundwater improvement efforts. And this SGMA is all about local control, and so we really see how like a direct alignment between these two efforts. Really SGMA recognizes that the locals are best suited to manage their groundwater basins because they are the most knowledgeable about them. And so this Watershed Coordinator Program will hopefully expand upon that.
Great, thanks, Keith. The next question we have here is for Catherine regarding AEM. There were several requests for the AEM webpage, and I believe that's been shared in the questions response to all attendees. So hopefully folks can find more information there. Catherine, this question, the attendee asks, if our GSA has already performed AEM surveys in their basin, will DWR be duplicating this effort for verification of the data obtained, or how will you be engaging with the locals as DWR continues the AEM surveys over this next year?
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. So we will be engaging with the locals, like I mentioned first, with that initial AEM webinar in the spring, and then we will be continuing outreach with the locals, with GSAs over the next several years. So those will be more in the form of meetings with GSAs to gather that information about those important areas within their basins, as I had mentioned before. And so also then in terms of where we will be surveying, if you've already had surveys conducted in your basin, yes, we will be conducting DWR's coarse grid surveys in all of the high and medium priority basins. And that's really so that we have a continuous data set that crosses basin boundaries that can be used both for the locals, but then it also can be used for regional groundwater management. And it won't be necessarily a verification or more of any individual AEM surveys that have already been conducted, but more more they can add to the basin characterization process.
Great, thank you, Catherine. The next question that I see here is a question regarding remote sensing data, and so I'm going to tee that up for Stephen Springhorn or Tyler to answer. So will DWR provide monthly evapotranspiration maps, ET maps, with field scale resolution using remote sensing?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Thanks, Melissa. I can take a swing at that and also invite Tyler to chime in as well. So we are investigating ET data. We have invested in some of it already and are coordinating with other efforts. And so just highlighting that we do have daily and monthly ET data available from 2010 to 2017 for the state. And so that's something that's available upon request. So we can get that information to you that you asked the question. Then also more broadly, we are coordinating with the Environmental Defense Fund and NASA efforts for open ET. We see that that's a benefit, and we are coordinating amongst other state agencies and federal agencies on that particular effort related to ET data.
Thanks, Stephen. Just a note, we have several questions here asking for links for some of these web pages and resources. Again, we want to reiterate, we will share the materials from this presentation, the recording of this broadcast after the webinar today. And we do have maybe time for one more question, Stephen, if we're able to entertain that.
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay, great. So the next question here So this question actually, I think, kind of goes back to some of the regulatory materials that were presented earlier. But in the GSP evaluation, how will DWR address where there are coordination agreements among GSAs, and if one GSP is incomplete or inadequate, do all the GSPs go into probation? And I think maybe that would be a good question for Stephen, yourself, or either Craig Altair to come back on and help respond to.
Yeah, Craig, why don't you take the first swing at that one? That's a great question. I wonder if Craig is not available. So could you repeat the question just one more time so I make sure I answer it appropriately?
You bet. So how will DWR address in the GSP evaluation where there are several under a coordination agreement? So if one GSP is incomplete or inadequate, do all GSPs go into probation?
There's Craig.
Sorry, I was having a little bit of trouble unmuting.
Okay.
And so our decisions we make on basins with multiple individual GSPs that are kind of combined under a coordination agreement would be for the basin. So, you know, ultimately those collection of GSPs needs to function, you know, equivalent to a single GSP for the basin. We make a decision based on that basin, you know, being able to achieve its basin-wide sustainability goal. So I guess then more specifically, we wouldn't be saying, okay, these two fail, these three pass. It's the decision is made at a basin scale. However, you know, our assessments, you know, it will very likely make it clear where the weaknesses are. We would need to do that in our assessment. And so I think it wouldn't be mysterious which, you know, which portions were weaker than others. But yeah, ultimately decisions at a basin scale or sub-basin scale.
Great, thank you, Craig. Just in an interest of time, I will turn it back over to Stephen for closing remarks.
All right, thank you, Melissa, and thank you all for the great questions and your attention today. We really do appreciate the great turnout and all the feedback we've received. I know we didn't get to every single question, but as mentioned, if you have follow-up questions, please email those to the emails that are on the screen right now, and our teams will work through those and get information back to you. So with that, again, we know that there's so much going on in all the basins across the state, and I just want to say that we at the department and knowing at the board as well and state agencies are committed to seeing SGMA be successful. And we're really at a critical time, as mentioned, for us to be working closely together in the SGMA community, whether that's on the regulatory side, whether that's on the assistance side, but with the common goal of statewide groundwater management. And so, again, we know it's going to be hard. We know it's going to be long-term, but we know that we have to do it. And so that's something that we're committed to, providing that assistance, providing that regulatory clarity on the decisions that will be coming this year, and moving together forward with SGMA implementation. And so again, please do not hesitate to reach out to us or our colleagues at the State Board, and really appreciate your time today and look forward to the continued coordination. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you.